everybody, I am Gloria Solarium. Today I will be presenting a poster on one of our current studies, which is Learning Across Languages, Bilingual Experience Supports Dual Language Statistical Word Segmentation. As we all know, bilinguals are extremely competent individuals. They're constantly navigating between languages and exploring a variety of different syllabic patterns. In general, all infants utilize statistical learning when acquiring a language. Statistical learning refers to the infant's ability to learn word patterns and know which of these word patterns go together in a specific language. Statistical learning then can be very useful, especially when infants need to partition novel words embedded in sentences. And as infants learn to partition words, they're also learning to detect the probability of certain syllables to occur. This is referred to as transitional probability. Therefore, transitional probability and statistical learning are both extremely important because they can help infants form relationships between syllables. As we all know, all languages have their very unique vocabulary and phonological patterns. Therefore, unlike monolinguals, bilingual infants experience more challenges when partitioning words now that they have to tease apart conflicting and overlapping regularities between these languages. And now I would like to mention some previous studies that have focused on the difference between bilingual and monolinguals' performance on other cognitive tasks, more specifically on switch tasks. However, these previous studies have not focused on bilinguals and monolinguals' ability to partition words in fake languages like our previous study. For example, Brack and Bilestone 2012 found that bilinguals from three groups, Chinese English, French English, and Spanish English, all had greater levels of executive control because they performed better in task switching. They also showed an advantage in metalinguistic tasks and a smaller global switch costs. A similar study by Byers, Haining, Fennels, and Werkner's 2013 tested 98 monolingual and bilingual infants on their ability to learn dissimilar sounding words such as lif and neem in a switch tasks. They found that bilinguals can learn two word-object pairings at a similar rate as their monolingual peers at 14 months of age. Therefore, these results indicate that bilingualism does not ease nor hinder bilinguals' development and associated word learning tasks. So compared to these previous studies, our current study asks, what is the importance that early language exposure has on word segmentation? So we hypothesize that early exposure to many languages will grant infants experience to trace statistical regularities in various novel languages. So we predict that bilingual infants will outcompete their monolingual peers in partitioning words from both fake languages. However, we believe that monolingual infants will still be able to partition words successfully from one fake language, because they can still utilize transitional probabilities. So for our methods, we decided to have 4 different experiments. Experiment 1A, which consisted of 24 monolingual infants, Experiment 1B and 1C, which consisted of 23 monolingual infants, and Experiment 2, which consisted of 23 bilingual infants. Individuals from Experiment 1A, 1B, and 1C had not previously been exposed to another language besides English. However, infants in Experiment 2 had previously been exposed to another language besides English at about 25 to 75% of the time. All infants were 14 months of age. They were all born for full term, and they were all from Northern California. They were all visually and auditorily healthy and had no previous signs of chronic ear infection. All of these infants sat on their parents' lap, and their parents were asked to wear headphones with background music to not give bias to the results. All of the infants were exposed to either 1 or 2 fake languages. L1, which was recited by a female, and L2, which was recited by a male. Both fake languages consisted of 4 disyllabic infrequent words, and they were all recited 120 times at random. The researcher, us, sat on a respective control booth where we try to get the infants' attention by showing them an animated video, which was a rotating orange petal. For our results, we noticed that gender and test language did not really affect the listening time nor their ability to discriminate part words versus words. And then, as seen here in Figure 1, we noticed that monolingual infants in Experiment 1A were able to partition fake language and had a greater bias in part words compared to words. However, if you take a look in Experiment 1B, where I remind you that it was where infants did not hear the language prior to the test phase, they were not able to differentiate part words versus words. Now, we conclude that infants' prior experience with language drove their preference when exposed to the stimuli. Now, if we look at experiment 1C, we can see that discrimination of part words and words and listening times were not notably different. There's a tiny increase in part words, but that's not notably different. Now, if we look in experiment 2, bilingual infants performed equally likely as their monolingual infants in experiment 1A. So we conclude that bilinguals who are exposed to two languages in the real world successfully partition alternating speech and fake languages. So just to remind you, this study analyzed monolingual and bilingual infants' capacity to learn by tracking statistical regularities in interlevel streams of linguistic input. As seen in graph on figure 1, we can see that monolingual infants in experiment 1A, 1B, and 1C were not able to learn the same syllable patterns as bilingual peers in experiment 2 when they were exposed to two fake languages and interlevel segments. So we conclude that bilingual infants were successfully utilizing statistical learning and transitional probability because infants were giving nonsense words and were forming associations between the speech sounds. Therefore, this describes how bilingual infants were better capable in segmenting words in the speech stream because bilinguals' daily conversation and interactions highly involve the ability to retain and synthesize information from each language. So, one of the previous studies, Barak and Bilestone 2012, supported our findings because they also found that bilingual infants had an advantage in general cognitive ability, and they said that maybe this attentional skill might be acquired due to bilinguals' ability to engage in inhibitory control now that they have to suppress one language over the other. However, in another previous study that I had mentioned, Byers, Hanlings, and Collings 2013, did not really support our findings. They said that the fact that bilingual infants grow up in one or two languages does not necessarily benefit the fact that they can detect nor acquire vocabulary. So based on what we know now, that dual language learners are very well equipped to utilize statistical regularities and present in their environmental languages, and that they can successfully outcompete their monolingual peers in other cognitive tasks. Further research can be done to see whether multilingual infants can outcompete bilingual infants, specifically in word segmentation tasks, and whether this additional cognitive input has any cognitive consequences. Thank you.